And we're on.
Okay, hello. While everyone gets logged on and set up, I'll take a moment to let you all know what to expect in the next hour or so. So welcome everyone. For those that don't know me, I'm James Westwood. I'm Senior Consultant with Harvey Nash, and I run the Leeds Dev practice, partnered with Usman Shahid, Managing Consultant for our Newcastle office, and Matt Power. Matt heads the Midlands Dev practice based from Nottingham. And we've come together to bring TechSpace to life. So this is the third in our series of bi-monthly events aimed at giving something back to our networks. And a big part of what we're hoping to do is put on a great event, but also create that ongoing support network for taking your career to the next level. So with that in mind, please do follow the main TechSpace page on Meetup, hopefully where you found us today. But from there, you'll have access to our Slack HQ with its events resources channel. Feel free to leave any questions, useful links, relevant content on here. There's some great reading lists and links from our previous events already for you to view. Today's event wouldn't be possible without our sponsor, so that's Harvey Nash. Harvey Nash specialises in tech recruitment across the world and partner with some amazing brands. I always use Channel 4 as a good example. They run a number of tech events themselves, various podcasts. There's the famous CIO survey that we run in partnership with KPMG, all worthwhile checking out as useful insights into the world of technology. So on to why we're here tonight, mental health in tech. It's an incredibly important topic, and I guess never more so than right now. It's something that can affect us all, both in our personal lives as well as at work. It's good to see organisations and individuals starting to put mental well-being at the top of the agenda, but there's still some way to go. You're going to hear from three expert speakers, all with varied backgrounds tonight, followed by a live Q&A. This part, the Q&A part, is really reliant on your questions, so please do send them through to us. Please use the Q&A function on Zoom as the event progresses, and we'll do our best to work through these in the course tonight, and any unanswered questions, we'll move those over to the Slack channel and do our best to answer them all for you. We're hoping that tonight's event meets its aim of providing useful insights and takeaways, and that will help you all, whether it's in your day job as a tech professional or at home. Moving on, I want to say the biggest of thank yous to all the speakers, who I know they all live very, very busy lives and given up their time to make tonight a success and be here with us. And a big thank you to you all as well for taking your time out of your day to be here with us. So thank you. I'll pass you on to Usman now, who's going to introduce the speakers, and look forward to meeting you all in the chat function as the event progresses on. Speak to you soon.
Cheers, James. Thank you very much. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first speaker, Lex Lofthouse of JH, who's going to be talking about knowing your worth. Don't set yourself on fires to keep others warm. Over to you, Lex.
Cool. Okay, let me just get the screen share on. Can everyone see? Brill.
Yes.
Okay. Brill. Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Alexandra Lofty, whatever you want to call me. I go by a million names these days. But my talk is about knowing your worth and looking after yourself in this industry, which I think is very, very important right now. It's all kind of framed around my career working in the agency world. And the title comes from a quote which I really love and resonates with me a lot, which is, don't set yourself on fire to keep others warm. So whoever coined that phrase, I'm stealing it because it is a wonderful metaphor to convey what I want to speak to you about tonight. Let me just move this. So a little introduction to myself first. I'll be quick with this one, but yeah, in my personal life, I am the person on the internet who posts a lot of Pokemon GIFs. I really like to play it in any form as well, like playing the trading card game, playing it on the Switch, all of that. Other things about me, I really like gigs and festivals, which it's not great at the minute. Haven't been to one in quite a while, but yeah, really enjoy doing that. And I guess I have spent a lot of lockdown playing Animal Crossing. That is very much my thing. But I guess what's most relevant to this talk is my passion and my career choice. I'm a designer. So I am a senior designer at JH. I've almost been doing it for a decade now, which is kind of scary to say out loud, but yeah, I mainly specialize in digital design. So mostly design for web, but I am multidisciplined, have experience in brand design, print design, and most recently I've been trying my hand at motion graphics, which is, yeah. I can even say that I've got a little bit of coding experience, but not a great deal. So I'm not going to go into any kind of technical things, and this talk is open to anyone who is in the industry or wants to get into the kind of tech industry, which I imagine is the majority of people here. So what I'll kick off with is the reason why I wanted to give this talk. So I started design 9 and a bit years ago. I was straight out of uni and I went into a junior design role at a digital agency. So I want to give you an idea of how I progressed throughout those years with a graph. So on the bottom axis is my career progression, and the axis on the left is my level of OMG WTF. So that is stress, anxiety, fragility, all the vulnerability on that side. So for about the first 7 years, kind of, you know, progressed as you would hope, you know, get a bit more confident, but there's still, you know, still ups and downs. Every day is still a challenge. And then a couple of years ago, I hit this massive spike. We'll call it the spike. And those feelings just completely went off the chart and I hit this breaking point. Like, the trigger here wasn't a big deal. It was a creative difference between myself, the creative director, and a client. It wasn't anything I hadn't dealt with before many times at that point. So why the spike? Well, I'd let a lot of factors boil up inside of me, things that I hadn't really addressed properly. And when you pump up a balloon full of little bits of air, eventually it's going to pop. So I would like to cover some of the lessons I've learned and that I am especially continuing to learn during this past year, in how I've managed to take that line kind of back down here again. So around that time, this was kind of what my brain was looking like. I was having a complete sort of meltdown, and one mistake had triggered this complete sense of fraud in my head. After 7 years of experience at that point, I just lost all confidence in my professional ability. So on my travels through the internet, I stumbled across this article that was on Creative Review. It's behind a paywall now, but it doesn't really matter. This was the first time that I'd seen the words imposter syndrome used before. And I'd like to just go over a quick explanation of what it is for those who don't know. So it was originally called imposter phenomenon, coined by 2 American psychologists, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes. And essentially what imposter syndrome is a feeling that despite overwhelming evidence to prove otherwise, you know, you're a fraud. You fooled others into believing that you're good at what you're doing. And even though you're, you know, very qualified to be doing that. So I imagine that probably sounds quite familiar to some people. When I started looking into it, I realized it wasn't just me who felt like this. You know, this article talks about imposter syndrome from a creative's perspective. And I finally had a kind of grasp on all those feelings I'd been struggling with. I understood that it was actually pretty common for people in the creative industry to identify with imposter syndrome. And when I looked further, I realized it wasn't just reserved for people like me. So this is Jodie Foster. After winning the Oscar for Best Actress for her role in The Accused, she said this in an interview. She said, "Excuse me, we went to give that to someone else. That was going to Meryl Streep." She'd won an Oscar, but she was in this mindset of everyone's going to find out, like, this wasn't meant for me. You know, she had that feeling of being a fraud. And what's even more wild is this quote. "Why would anyone want to see me again in a movie? I don't know how to act anyway, so why am I doing this?" That is a quote from Meryl Streep, who Jodie Foster referenced in her quote as well. So even Meryl Streep has had her wobbles with imposter syndrome. So it felt like a very relatable kind of thing. If, you know, if even the masters in their field can feel like that, then it felt like a normal kind of feeling to have. And just for reference, Meryl Streep holds the most Oscar nominations of all time in those big 4 acting categories. So she's she's definitely a master of her field. But I could feel that the trigger of that kind of breaking point was coming from this imposter syndrome. Like, I was a senior designer. I worked really hard to get to that point, had years of experience, and knew I could do it, but my brain was telling me totally otherwise. So I took a bit of a step back at that point, realized that it wasn't the first time I'd felt this way. Sure, it might have been the first time where it had some pretty horrific consequences, but I'd seen these signs and these symptoms in myself before this. So what I found really useful in managing it was recognizing what kind of triggered those feelings. So for me, the thing that really triggered it was getting negative feedback. And not just negative feedback, but bad feedback. So feedback that is not constructive, feedback that you can't understand or interpret, that doesn't address what the issue is. That kind of feedback makes my brain go, I've got no solution to this. And that's when I felt my most kind of worthless as a designer. So for other people, it might be, you know, something else that triggers it. But I know a lot of people do fall kind of backwards when it comes to getting this kind of feedback. And it can be a very common trigger of not feeling good enough. I did a lightning talk last year with some tips on receiving negative feedback that I will just summarize quickly here, and like things to think about. So don't take feedback personally. This is a really difficult one, and it's very easy to say this, but I tried to start separating myself from my work and looking at feedback, not as attacks on my work, but as more of an objective thing. And that helped me to try and stop taking things quite personally. Questioning bad feedback. So if you do get that horrible feedback where it's like, I don't like it, ask them why. Delve deeper into what the reasoning is, because they probably know, but just don't know how to articulate it very well, or articulate it in a way that will be helpful to you. And then the last one is have some empathy with your client or whoever is giving the feedback. They might not have a great deal of technical knowledge. They might be a messenger for other stakeholders. You just kind of never know what's going on with them. So try not to immediately jump to a negative kind of view of them based on their feedback. Another thing which is really important in tackling your own wobbles with things is learning how to take a compliment. So this is something I think we can all do a way better job of. Like, I imagine most of us are British or in that British sensibility, so taking that compliment is really hard, but for the sake of our brains, I think we have to try and do it. So for example, say you put a thing out there for the world to see, piece of your work, something like that. It might not be the world, you know, it might be a handful of people. You might get 10, 20 great compliments on the thing. But then you get this one bad comment, and it is so easy to laser focus into that bad comment. It is very, very easy for people to be negative. It's especially on the internet. But it takes a bit more for people to go out their way to be nice and complimentary. So those positive compliments are worth way more than the negative ones, and so are you in your work. So I ask you all, next time this happens and you see a bad comment and you get stuck on it, consciously pick out one of the good ones instead and try and laser focus on that. We need to start kind of recognizing these compliments and maybe dismissing some more of these negative ones. You're never going to please and appeal to everyone. That's just not how the world works. So what you can do is make a choice, and you can shift your focus onto the more positive things. So there's something that I want everyone to kind of avoid doing. So when we do get a compliment, we can sometimes be very quick to associate it to something or someone else. So say someone compliments you on some work you did, say as part of a team. Someone compliments you and you go, oh, I didn't really contribute much to that. It was all them, really. So while it seems like you're being humble, it also diminishes your own contribution, and your contribution to that piece of work was very valid. So that's bad. So there's a much kinder way of addressing that compliment, both to yourself and to the person who gave it to you. Because when someone gives you a compliment and you shake it off, it's really awkward for the other person. Please bear that in mind. So if someone compliments you on that piece of work you did with the team, you can instead say, thanks, I worked really hard on that with the rest of my team. That thanks the person for giving you the compliment, and it addresses your input as well, and your input was super valuable. So we could all, oh, yeah, good. We could all do with learning how to apologize less. It's, you know, or how to take compliments. It's a very, very hard habit to break. But if you can start to recognize these kind of things, recognize this behavior, I urge you to start kind of changing it or recognizing it, because the way that you speak to yourself is just as important as the way that you speak to other people as well. I saw this great little graphic. It's by Danny Donovan, and it addresses some simple ways of changing your language, similar to that kind of example. And this is in the context of changing your language in emails. It shows a more kind of confident approach in talking about yourself. And I've tried to use this style of reply a lot more often. So it kind of addresses, you know, don't apologize when you don't need to, you know, and, you know, recognize that your schedule's good, that you know what you're doing. It's just like very small changes in language, which can really make a difference. I really, really like this. I find it particularly relevant right now. We're in a time where we can't really interact with people as much. And we can't convey the tone of our message in written form quite as well as we can in real life. So tone is really important in communication. It is half the battle. And right now, I know I'm struggling with using text-based communications as a main point of contact, especially like at work. So if you're communicating with your team on like Slack or Teams or whatever tool you're using, I find that using emojis is really, really important. And I didn't think that in my life, I would be telling people that emojis are a vital piece of communication, but here we are, 2020. A smiley emoji can be the difference between someone thinking that you're blunt with them or not. Winky face can get across the fact that you're being a bit sarcastic, maybe not appropriate at work, but you know what I mean. Like, people attach a feeling and a tone of voice to your message that might not be the way that you intended to put it across. So you can help the person on the other end read it in the manner that you wanted it to come across in some way if you attach an emoji to it. So I grew up with like AOL and MSN and all those things. Emojis were a huge part of that, or emoticons they were called back then. They were a huge part of that. So it is not a new kind of piece of communication and technology, I just think it's quite important now when pretty much a huge chunk of our communications is with text. So emojis also transcend language, like they are a language in themselves, of themselves. And it's quite a universal way of communicating with people no matter who you're speaking to. So if I can get my dad to start using emojis in text, I can get you to start using them too. So I'll move on to failure. And what I'd like to talk about is sometimes we do fail, it happens. And what I've learned over the past few years is how to fail correctly, which sounds kind of weird, but hear me out. Failure is an essential part of learning. Without allowing ourselves to make mistakes, we can't learn from them. And I talked about negative feedback earlier. And for me, I used to see that as a real mark of failure, getting that negative feedback. And I've tried to reframe it now. So I look at feedback now as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to learn and grow and just develop in your skills. So you might have failed, but that's okay, as long as you learn from it. And we have to accept that failure is a step forward. So I'll move away from the feedback thing and I'll frame this lesson on failing in terms of learning a new skill or developing a current skill that you have. So last year I wanted to start to learn how to use After Effects because I wanted to do some motion graphics. And I was really excited to start. And I just fell down at the first hurdle. It's just setting up the workspace. And my brain was telling me, you can't do this. You're a designer. What do you know about like animation and stuff like this? And instead of throwing in the towel at the first step, I persevered and got there in the end. And after a few weeks of learning, I started doing client work. So this is a tiny little piece of animation I did for a client, tiny. And how many times did I fail making that? Hundreds of times. Every day I came up against something that I couldn't do or just something that I did really wrong. And each time my brain was going, give up, stop, like, this ain't for you. But I kept reminding myself that every failure was a lesson and that giving up was the easy option. So when you realize that you don't have to be perfect at something, you can make steps to being good at something. Which takes me to two great quotes that I love by Paula Scher. She's kind of like a god in the designer world. And she says it kind of better than I do. So it took me a few seconds to draw it, but it took me 34 years to learn how to draw it in a few seconds. And another quote is, it's through mistakes that you actually can grow. You have to get bad in order to get good. So simply put, growth takes time. And she's right. You have to be the worst at something before you can be good at something. And unfortunately, there aren't any training montages in life, as much as I wish there were. I thought of this stupid segment in my talk after I watched Mulan. So Mulan, not the new one, the cartoon. So that film has arguably, maybe not arguably, it definitely has one of the greatest training montages of all time in it. And if you haven't seen it, I'll just overview it. Mulan impersonates a male soldier in order to stop her elderly father from being forced to fight. She starts off in training pretty badly, but she eventually trains hard enough in order to get this arrow down from this massive pole, which is a big challenge. Anyway, I thought about this, and despite the montage being only the length of a song, in reality, that's probably would have been the longest part of Mulan's journey, is training to get that strong. I looked at how long the section movie was, 3 minutes, 22 seconds. And the whole movie is about an hour, 28 minutes. It's like 3.6%. That's probably wrong. But what I'm trying to get at is that would have been like the longest period of time, really, her training. And there are no shortcuts like this in life, unfortunately. We cannot montage our way through our own learning process, and we have to fail plenty of times before we can get that Mulan moment on top of the pole. So when I speak about failing, this is one thing I really advocate for, is you're going to fail a lot, especially if you're learning something new. So you have to celebrate the little wins. It doesn't matter how small. Look at this little horse. He is bigging himself up to do something. And then when he finally does it, he celebrates that little win. So I think we can all be a bit more like this little horse when we try and learn some new things. As little as it is, that little tiny step, it's still a step. So do celebrate it. So after talking about imposter syndrome and failure, I'm going to touch on expectations and address this question of, am I doing enough? So I believe that our industry, like tech industry, can perpetuate this idea that we should always be doing something and we should always be busy. We should be making a podcast. We should be reading 52 books in the year. We should have a side hustle. Hate that term, by the way. Expectation just feels like another burden on your shoulders, just because of the industry that we work in and the ideals that it can push. And right now, during lockdown, pandemic times, I'm hearing this kind of stuff. Like this is quite early lockdown. This is from April. But people, and I find it's usually people in positions of power or privilege, such as this guy, love to tell you that you should be coming out of, lockdown with new skills, new source of income, like this side hustle idea. We're still in the midst of a pandemic. So if I can make it out of bed and brush my teeth and struggle through the day, that's enough for me, if I'm honest. So I'm guessing that a fair few of you have heard this phrase, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Well, I think that's rubbish. I think it's a very dangerous phrase. Just because you love your job doesn't mean that it isn't work. And this way of thinking just pushes that idea that we should be filling our spare time with more things that look like work. So as a designer, on this kind of topic of doing enough, as a designer, constantly posed with this question, should designers code? Designers who code are more valuable, blah, 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 blah. We've been told we should code, basically. And for years, I didn't really know anything about code, and I considered learning. And it was only because of this expectation that we should be doing more. So what I decided to do last year was to give it a go. The goal in my head was to kind of dip my toe in the water and see if it was something that I wanted to pursue and integrate into my career. So I joined this little group called Project Function. They are a wonderful bunch of people who provide free education in web development to underprivileged and underrepresented groups, which at the time that I joined was women. I had a real blast at Project Function as a learner. I learned a hell of a lot, HTML, CSS, even JavaScript, which I hate. And after I graduated from that course, there we go, there's me with a certificate. I've made my mind up. Should designers code? I have no idea. Should this designer code? No, it wasn't for me. And what's really important and what I'm trying to get across here is that I decided it wasn't for me. I tried it, I didn't want to do it, and I didn't feel like I was pushed into that. I know a lot of people have done it because they felt pushed into doing it. But it's your own decision to make. Yeah, and we just shouldn't really be pushed to have to do these things. This leads me to this really good resource, which I can post in the Slack. This book, Life-Changing Magic of Not Giving Enough, by Sarah Knight, fantastic book about how to spend your time wisely. There is a TED Talk, which is like a shortened version, kind of summarizes the points, but she talks about how we spend our time and how to stop spending time on things that we don't want to. Imagine your time is money. Would you want to spend that on things that you don't want to? No. So why do we spend our time on things that we don't want to do? We need to give our time more consciously because it's valuable. I used to be really rubbish at spending my time wisely. Kept putting other people's needs before my own. And I said yes to everything, even if I didn't really want to do it. So now I look at things much more objectively and decide whether I want to do it or if it's worth my time doing. So saying no to things that you really don't want to do is actually a really courageous act of self-love. And we shouldn't let other people decide how we spend our time. I think this kind of thing is a really good example of something that adds to this idea of expectation. So this is a mocked up job advert, and I'm sure we've probably all seen a few like this, where you're looking for a unicorn, ninja, guru, wizard. This creature does not exist. And it's always, you know, asking for such an all-round kind of person. And if by some miracle you can find someone that ticks all these boxes, usually what's missing off of that is a really good salary that supplements all those skills. Yeah, I just think that this kind of all-round unicorn job ad just really pushes that ideal of us having to do everything. I interviewed for a job once where they were looking for an all-round designer, brand, print, digital, which is fine. I can do all those things, but I didn't get the job because at the time I had no coding experience. This wasn't on the job description. At the time I felt really, really awful about it, but I realized that I completely dodged a bullet because in no way was this company valuing someone who could do all of that stuff. The salary definitely did not reflect that at all. And I feel really bad for the person who will have taken that job in the end, because I know that they'll have been undervalued for the huge amount of skills they could offer. And it's this kind of expectation that leads people into working in a style that we call crunch. So crunch is a term that's used to describe overworking, putting in long hours, usually to meet a deadline. You might crunch if you're trying to get a load of work done before you go on holiday, but crunch culture is where businesses kind of taken that style of working as a short-term solution into a long-term, just general style of working, and where it's considered normal. So last year, God, I don't even remember what year it is now. Last year at Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference, Tim Cook rounded off his speech by thanking his team for giving up their nights and their weekends with their families in order to get work done. Now, it's not surprising to hear that from one of the biggest tech companies in the world, but it's still very shocking. Crunch culture is unfortunately a huge problem in the tech industry, and it's probably most prevalent actually in games development. So Fortnite, anything by Telltale Games, Red Dead Redemption 2, recently got pushed with its deadline, Cyberpunk yesterday. They're all kind of built on crunch culture, from underpaid, undervalued staff, expecting people to give up loads of their valuable time without necessarily compensating them as such, in order to complete your product. Usually means that you're not managing schedules right, or what's probably the worst side of it is that you're deliberately taking advantage of your staff. And I know that's a very big thing in games development because of the thrill and the privilege of working in games dev. It kind of harks back to that whole phrase of, if you love what you do, you know, you'll never work a day in your life. I think that's very much a culture thing in games dev. And what's really unfortunate is that crunch can end up causing burnout. And as someone who's paid to be creative on cue, I can't tell you how dangerous burnout is to my career. If I burn out, I can't do my job. And this industry is pretty fiercely competitive, so it's not really an option for me. So I believe those of us who are experiencing that, we kind of have to call it out, make our voice heard. I know that there has been some unionizing recently in America in some tech-based companies, so it's very nice to see that it's being recognized, because it's just not a long-term way of working at all. Lastly, I'd like to talk quickly about maintaining a good work-life balance. So remember that spike in my graph? This was me at that time trying to maintain a work-life balance. It's not really me in that suit, obviously. But as someone who was exposed to crunch culture, imposter syndrome, you know, the expectations and busyness of life, my life completely revolved around my work. And as someone who had a passion for what they did, you know, I felt really lucky to be in that kind of job. So I kind of thought that that was normal. So when I left a couple jobs back, I left not long after that kind of spike. I took a step back and just tried to evaluate what was really important to me, and what kind of balance I wanted to maintain. It was a bit of a clean slate opportunity moving jobs, really. So I heard a talk at a Women in Tech event in Nottingham, and it actually centered around negotiation, and a lot of it was around negotiating for money. I was already kind of confident in doing that. I know not everyone is though, but I wasn't really afraid to ask for that. But it's still a very important thing is being able to negotiate for money and negotiating for what you're worth. But the talk also centered around negotiating for time. This is something I never really considered. In my head, I considered flexi time as, you know, something reserved for people who had families and kids. But I don't really want to have kids. And so why was I valuing my time at any less than someone who did? So that was kind of it for me after that talk. That was my kind of rock in the ground, like the immovable object. That's something I had to have. Flexible hours was my thing. And if I wasn't going to get that, then I didn't want to go somewhere. I think we're at a point now where companies within our industry are starting to open their eyes to this way of working, especially right now. I think coronavirus has really opened up the remote working side of things. So recognizing differences in people's way of working is really important. And I hope that it's opened that up. So some people might not be like morning people, might want to work a bit later or vice versa. I think giving people the tools to do their best work, whether that's flexible hours, better salary, remote working, whatever it is, you're ultimately going to get the best from that person. So why wouldn't you do that? So my last kind of point here is I really want everyone to kind of to try and figure out what's important to you in order to maintain that balance. And I know that might be kind of difficult right now. The work-life balance is, for me, at the moment, a very thin line, because this is my house. This is where I work at the moment. So it's a bit difficult. But I think if you can find those things that will make your life easier, I don't think there's any reason why we shouldn't seek those out or negotiate for them. It is something that I very much underestimated in my early career was the balance of work, because I felt those feelings of I'm so lucky to be doing what I love for a living, but it's still work and you still need to maintain that balance. So yeah, I seek that out in a new jobs, and it made my life a lot healthier. So I'm going to wrap up this talk now. This isn't a plea for you to like be a total diva at work or things like that, but it's just some nuggets of information that I've put together, things based on my own experience. And I hope that there's some little tidbits in there that you can take away and that will be helpful. It's a little bit of change. It's very hard out there right now. So please, overall, just try and be kinder to yourselves. Yeah, just be kinder to yourselves. These are just some of the takeaways. I know this talk's being recorded. I can share these slides if anyone wants them as well. But yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for listening.
Thanks a lot, Lex. That was absolutely fantastic. And I can promise everyone that wasn't a Harvey Nash job advert that was shared there. So just wanted to make sure we were all aware. Moving on, Rob Kendal, a Voice Foundry, going to be talking about fighting imposter syndrome as a developer. Over to you, Rob.
Yo, I've got a really strong gift game, but I don't have any fancy gifts for you or like a presentation or even quite as fancy the lights. I do have some fancy-ish lights, but not quite as good as Lex's, but that was awesome. Thanks to Lex for kind of defining imposter syndrome a little bit, because that saved me a job. But I'm going to kind of run through some points on my own article. I wrote one back in kind of May of last year about kind of fighting imposter syndrome as a developer, because it's something I suffered with, and I think everyone does at some point. You know, I think if you've never felt like a little bit insecure about your job or feeling like you don't deserve the accomplishments or that foreboding sense that you'll be found out at any moment, or frequent comparisons to peers and, you know, a bit of personal unworth, or feeling just, you know, like an inferiority complex. If you've never kind of experienced that at work, then you're either probably a raging sociopath, supremely arrogant, or just so positive that, you know, you can't see the wood for the trees. But I think everyone will have experienced it to some scale. I mean, some people, it can be quite crippling. I worked with a guy who it just held him back from everything. And myself, you know, I've had it in various kind of orders of magnitude, some, especially early on in my career, where you kind of like a little bit unsure of your own skills because you don't know as much, right? Where now I'm a bit more confident, you know, I feel it less, but still, you know, I kind of experience it. I then, once I'd got well into my career, I'd been a developer for many years, I then decided to chuck that security in the bin and start my own freelance agency. And that brought with it a whole different set of kind of, you know, this imposter syndrome, because I was there in networking meetings with other business owners and they'd be doing it for years, and instantly you're kind of back to step one of like, well, I know a lot about front-end development and expensive coloring in, but I don't know quite as much about running a business, you know, because you've got sales and marketing and tax and all this other horrendousness that you have to deal with. And so, you know, it's how can I compete with them, and you know, what can I kind of offer? So, you know, I think those are some of the kind of symptoms, and I think it presents itself if you're a developer and in your work, you know, you might keep quiet in meetings or be in fear of kind of laugh at your ideas. You know, it holds you back from going for that job because you think, well, I'm not really good enough to go and do that job. Why would they hire me? You know, it stops you being creative sometimes. You know, why should I? What can I possibly add to Flexbox in CSS when it's got such in-depth articles on CSS tricks? Mine aren't going to be as good as that. So you kind of, you know, you don't put that content out there. You don't put yourself out there. You know, why should I start that open source project? Who'd use it? You know, who's going to like my stuff? And I think when they do kick in, you know, I've got some good kind of share my own experience around how I've kind of dealt with it and coped with it. And I think one of the best things is to run your own race, you know, and compare yourself to yourself and not to others. Because the problem with others is you end up with this kind of iceberg syndrome, right? So most people present a very positive images of themselves, especially on social media. You see like the fancy cars, or look, well, I'm doing this, and like Lex was saying, I'm running 10 side projects and a podcast and something else. And they don't show you all the crap that's underneath that's led to that point, or just they don't show you all the kind of spinning plates. You just see the kind of the show at the top of it, the sort of good parts. And also as well, it's easy to forget that I like to think of people as kind of Venn diagrams. Yeah, so they have their own skills and you have your own skills, and there's probably a knowledge and there's an experience and there's like an overlap in the middle. But what you tend to see is all of their experience and knowledge and none of your own, or, you know, and that can be a big part of imposter syndrome. And I think it's important to recognize that, you know, certainly that's the way I've come to understand it. I understand and know loads about development, so I've got loads of experience, loads of knowledge, but there's oceans of stuff that I don't know. And there are just different things that other people know a lot about. And I think if you can kind of go in with that mindset of like, look, I know a lot of stuff, I've got a lot of stuff to offer, but so do other people, and look at it in more of that kind of comparable sense rather than, oh, they know so much more than me, you know. But compare yourself to yourself, because really that's the only person you've got control of is yourself. you can use maybe some of that if you are overly negative and look at other people and think, oh, I don't know about their knowledge, they know loads more about React than I do. Then, you know, you can use that as a bit of a kicking off point to go, well, maybe I can use that to improve my own React knowledge, identify the gaps in your own skills and knowledge and learning, and kind of progress that, and then compare yourself to yourself later on. So, you know, I can confidently say, I mean, I hope I know enough about React. I'm writing a course about it at the minute. So hopefully, yeah. But, you know, 5 years ago, didn't know a thing about React at all. And yet I've kind of gone and learned that. And now I'm fairly sort of confident in it. But I've got that point of measure to be able to confidently say, well, I'm better than I was X amount of months or years ago. And use that to kind of, you know, springboard yourself on. Leads on to, you know, similar, I've covered it a bit there about recognizing your own strengths and acknowledging your weaknesses. It's very easy to focus on the negatives, and I don't know if this is some kind of primitive throwback when it was like less challenging to just focus on where the lion is rather than looking at all the trees that aren't going to harm you, and whether we've kind of just took that on board and now we end up in this, you know, very easy culture where it's very easy to be a bit more negatively focused. But I think if you can look at objectively what you're good at and turn that into an action plan, like I said, to improve your strengths, to continue your strengths and build on those and improve your weaknesses. You know, for example, I really like Sarah Drasner. If you don't know who she is, she's like a bit of a Twitter celebrity. She works for a hosting platform called Netlify. She's a very successful developer in her own right, and she knows, you know, loads and loads about SVG animations. She has a really good book on the subject. But that doesn't mean, you know, that because of her successes that I don't belong as a front-end developer, and I don't, you know, deserve the role I have, or you know, anything I've kind of achieving things. But I can recognize that as an opportunity to improve an area of understanding. I think another point is to talk about it. I think this, you know, imposter syndrome aside, mental health in general, I think one of the big problems is we kind of just, you know, it's come from this British, like, we'll have a cup of tea and a digestive and hey, everything's fine, you know, and really what we should be doing is talking about it more. You know, if you have fears and doubts, pardon me, if you have like fears and doubts and insecurities, talk about them more, whether that's with managers or peers, you know, ask them about it. Unless they're a raging douche, they should be fine. Kind of, you know, ask people, how did you learn about X? Or could you help me learn more about something? Or, you know, talk about it. I'm feeling a little bit out my depth. You know, could you help me? And you'll find that a lot of people will be in that same position or as you and feel that way, or they will themselves want to kind of help you, and because they recognize that they've been there in the past, you know. So find a sympathetic ear or three and bring up your feelings about it, and you'll soon find that other people will either make you feel better or share their experience, and you think, oh, I'm not alone, you know. Another thing that Lex brought up was this focusing on the positive experiences. And it is an awful part of the human condition, the difficulty we have in kind of dealing with compliments and believing in them when we get them. It's very easy to kind of be really focused on this negative thing that we have, but like easily sort of shrug off and be blasé about anything good that we have. One thing I like to do is I keep a little kind of work journal of sorts. So if any time I have any kind of really positive feedback, or I've been part of a team where we've accomplished something really good, really great, I'll note that down, you know. And it's not to kind of create some kind of catalogue of how awesome Rob is, but it's just, you know, I think it's easy to be so blasé and shrug that off, where you can go back and look and go, no, actually, look, you know, we put that hard work in, we've got that experience, we deserve that kind of pat on the back, and to keep track of that. And I think balance out that, you know, that counterpoint to that negativity. I think, you know, remembering that and reminding yourself that you're not alone in it. It feeds into the talking about it topic, but, you know, if you don't rightly realize this and you need it spelling out, you know, you are not alone in that kind of suffering. You know, there are countless developers that I've spoken to at all ends of the career spectrum, from those just wanting to learn to code to their first job to people who've been doing it 20 years. And, you know, they will have that sense of kind of being a bit of a fraud, as if they're going to be found out at any moment. You know, and like I said, there's orders of magnitudes of that, but I think, you know, keep sharing those experiences and make it a habit to talk to your colleagues and peers about their own experiences, and remember that you're not alone in it, because that isolation for mental health in general is one of the things that will make it much worse for you. And then the kind of last bit of advice with it would be to drive through it anyway. You know, it is a bit more of the sledgehammer, the blunt end of the tool, but you know, sometimes that voice won't go away and you've just got to get on and do it anyway. A good example of this would be the job I do now for Voice Foundry. I'm technically an AWS engineer. Now, I do not know loads about AWS. I'm going to just put that right out there. That's not the imposter syndrome talking, that's just literal fact. I do not have, you know, heaps of AWS experience. I know what it is. I can tell you what Dynamo does. I can write a Lambda because I can write JavaScript. When I applied for the role I have now, I was actually applying for a different role. And after talking to the recruiter, they went, no, don't know about this one, but have you looked at this other one, you know, the role I have now? And I was a bit like, well, I don't know, it seems there's a lot of Node in there, there's a lot of AWS, and that's not my kind of background or experience. And, you know, a younger, more imposter syndrome filled version of Rob would have gone, no, I'm just gonna, I can't do that. Why would they hire me? But, you know, I'm at that point now where I'm nearly 40 and I'm kind of like, screw it, I'm going to go for that. Because what's the worst that'll happen? You know, you go through the hiring process, which is you know, it's a two-way version of you vet them to see if they're the right place for you, and they vet you to see if you're the right fit in both sort of skills and outlook. And, you know, they consider the broader wealth of kind of experience and things that I came along with, the kind of personality. You know, I'm like to think I'm pretty affable and pretty amiable. I get on with people. I've got a pretty can-do spirit. You know, I try desperately not to bring any ego. I don't think I have one because again, I recognize the fact that, yeah, I know some stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that I don't know, and I'm quite eager to learn. And they look at all that kind of stuff and factor that in. Then at the end of the day, they decided to give me a job offer. So again, I try to look at that and think, well, instead of looking at it in, oh, should I get this job and why would they hire me? I focus very much on like, well, they've done their due diligence. I haven't lied and said, oh yeah, I've got all the AWS certifications as long as there's no follow-up questions. You know, I laid it out on the line. This is where my experience is. AWS isn't one of them. It's something I'd really like to get into. And then they made me an offer. So I kind of think, you know, by driving through it anyway and just thinking, you know, what have I got to lose? The absolute worst that will happen is they would just say, do you know what, it's not a good fit. We're not going to give you the job offer. Unless there was some kind of horrendous torture house that made you sort of jump through some hoops and then not give you anywhere, but like, I don't know, publicly shame you. But no one would do that. No one would do that. So the absolute worst that will happen is you won't get anywhere. You know, if I see something and I, you know, if I'm looking for a job and I see something I just like the look of and I'm interested in, I'll just go for it and think, you know, and just keep reminding myself of that as I go, that, you know, sometimes you've got to push that little voice in. You talk about it, you push it in, you just go for it anyway, because, you know, ultimately it's other people to decide. I think that's about my 10 minutes. I've kind of, you know, gone through those kind of bullet point tips that I have. I think, you know, mental health in general, keep talking about it. Imposter syndrome, keep talking about it. You know, share your experiences, and just compare yourself with yourself. And I think that's really good. If you'd like to check the article out, I will share that in there. Shameless plugs for me. I'm more than happy to talk to people offline, or I love meeting new people. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I think I'm just Rob Kendal. You can find me on Twitter at Kendal Mintcode, which people either find really funny or don't get at all. And I do run a podcast called The Front End, which is the frontendpodcast.site, or on Twitter, I think it's Front End Podcast. You'd think I know my own Twitter handle for my own podcast, but but it's something along those lines. But yeah, do reach out to me. I'm more than happy to chat to people as I go.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rob. Really insightful stuff there. And I saw some questions coming through the chat as well, which we'll cover off towards the end. Handing over to Kirsten Edmondson, Head of Development for Delarue from the mighty Northeast, talking about life hacks, organizing chaos. Over to you, Kirsten.
Thank you very much. It's really nice to be here. So thank you for inviting me. I will just share my screen and make sure that I can get the right version up. So can you all see my screen? Can anyone see my screen?
Yes, if you just hit the display settings button again at the top, Kirsten, to switch the view.
Yeah, thank you. How's that?
It hasn't updated on mine.
Okay. Okay. Let's try. Let's try that one. How's that?
Yeah, if you, there we go, brilliant. Thank you.
Yay. Okay, so newbie PC user, apologies everyone. I missed my Mac. So I know we're running a little bit over time, so I will whiz through this. Mental health, particularly in technology, is something that I'm very interested in. And to sort of echo the previous speakers, have had experience with my own challenges, and also managing teams, have helped support people through their challenges. And what I wanted to do to sort of bookend the really good talks that we've had, or just talk about some life hacks that I've learned along the way, which can help organize the chaos of our very busy lives. So Agile is a software development methodology I'm sure most of you are aware of. However, it's not just for software development. I've used Agile successfully with creative teams, with HR teams, with charities, with people in all different walks of life and all different disciplines. And the thing I love about it is really boils down to this quote, and it's the ability to respond to change and to succeed in an uncertain, turbulent environment. And I think most people would categorize 2020 certainly as an uncertain and turbulent environment. And working in technology, we've heard some great examples from the previous speakers about how things can be turbulent, and crunch culture combined with imposter syndrome and so on make for a very uncertain environment for a lot of people. So what I'd like to do is just to talk through some agile behaviors. So when we talk about agile, there's this sense of doing agile or being agile. So a team might use Scrum or Kanban or one of the other methodologies and talk about them. And there are lots of different ceremonies and things that one has to use. But for me, it's more important to be agile and to have the mindset that allows you to deal with that uncertainty and to deal with that complexity in a manageable way. And if you look at all the methodologies, you can distill them down to some particular practices. And so whether it's a work environment, or I've got a friend, for example, who's just started her MBA, and we were talking about how to organise lots of workload and competing priorities between studying for an MBA and working full time. And so with that in mind, sorry, would you just excuse me for a second? Honey, you have to go out the room.
Time's up, Mother.
I know it's up, but I'll be there soon.
Time's up, Mother.
Dealing with uncertainty and unpredictable events. There we go. My son has me on a timer because I'm due to play a game with him. So essential behavior. So one of the first things I would do is to create a backlog or a to-do list. Then I'd prioritize it, time box the activity, manage work in progress, reflect, and look for feedback. So when you're busy at work and when you're busy at home, having a to-do list or a backlog, whatever you want to call it, is a really useful thing. I've got friends who have organized their weddings this way. I know people who organize their work this way. And I organize my sort of self-development in terms of skills I want to learn and stuff I have to do at home. I've got my own little board in front of me that just helps me deal with doctor's appointments and vets appointments and, you know, all the stuff that life brings up. So having a backlog is really valuable. But it's important also in terms of mental health to add things onto that to-do list which are beneficial, not not just in terms of getting the task done, but allowing you to find balance. So having activities on there like eat lunch, go for a walk, block out some time in your calendar to think and to reflect and not be on Zoom calls or team calls all the time. Those are legitimate items that you can put on your to-do list as an aide-memoire to prompt you during the day or during the week, and to allow you to have time to take a step back from the busyness of your day or your week and focus on what's important. Because unless you plan for that time, unless you make provision for yourself to eat and go for a walk around the block or whatever it is you need to do to mentally relax, you won't do it. And you'll get swamped with meeting requests and answering emails or Slack messages or whatever else. So once you have your to-do list, then prioritize it. And there are lots of different ways in which you can prioritize work. Moscow is one of the most well-known, but there are lots of different techniques that you can use. And that's basically looking at everything. And Moscow is about relative prioritization. So you look at something on the list and say, if I only got one thing done, what do I absolutely have to do? Now that could be to go to the supermarket and make sure you've got something in for tea, because then the rest of, you know, the rest of your house of cards falls over if you're not feeding yourself and your family. It could be to I don't know, to complete a wireframe for a particular client or to answer a proposal or whatever it is. But if you only have to do one thing, if somebody's holding a gun to your head, what one thing must you do? So that goes to the top of your list. And then you prioritize everything else relative to that. So the next thing on your list, would you swap it out for the must have? And if you wouldn't, then it's going to be a should have or a could have. And often on your to-do list in any given time period, we'll come on to time boxing in a minute, there should only be a couple of must-haves. What often happens is when you're working with clients, when you've got loads of stuff going on at work and family competing, the temptation is that everything's important. I looked at a Dilbert cartoon before I got here, and in it Dilbert said, can you just prioritize these things for me? The must-haves, the criticals versus the essentials. And that's often how we get things, we get work delivered to us, or we get requests delivered to us. But that's not true. That's the illusion that busyness creates. So what is the one thing that I have to do? And there might be two. You might have to finish your wireframe and you have to put your car in for a service, because then you've got your work thing covered and you've got your home thing covered, and then everything else gets compared to that. So making a dentist appointment for a 6 monthly checkup, is that a must-have? Well, it might be, but it might not be for today. It's just got to be done in the next 2 weeks. So that's a should or a could for a particular time box. Completing the website, if you haven't done your wireframe, isn't going to get done. So that would be, a nice to have. So do your relative prioritization on your to-do list and on your backlog. And as you take things, as you complete things, look at that prioritization again, because if you all of a sudden get a terrible toothache, then making that appointment for your 6 monthly checkup suddenly becomes more urgent, and therefore that would go from a could have to a must have. And it's the same with work items. It might be that you've just released something live and there's a critical error in it. So whereas you might have some bugs kicking around and you do your normal cleanup, all of a sudden that thing goes to the top of the list. And so your priorities will shift based on the uncertainty and the complexity of life. So you can go back and you do the reprioritization as often as you need to. If I just nip back to this one, this is actually a Kanban board, and Kanban is a methodology within Agile, but it's a really simple thing, and you have 3 or 4 columns. The middle bit, doing, can often be called work in progress. So if you were doing software development, you might say to do is actually my backlog, doing is work in progress, and done is complete or done. You would use different labels. If it's a personal backlog, then these will be fine. So you do your prioritization. Now, one of the key things is work in progress limits. So a work in progress limit allows you to have smooth delivery. I'm sure we've all been in situations where everything important gets left to the very end. So you might only pack for your holiday 12 hours before you get on the plane because you've been organising everything else and you haven't figured out where your passport is, or if you've actually got a bathing suit that fits, or whatever it might be. When it comes to work, there can be that crunch at the end of a delivery where you're thinking, oh my goodness. When you're organising a talk like Usman's organised and James is organised, then, you know, have you got your speakers lined up? Does everybody know what they're doing? Do they know the running order? Some of those conversations might have happened today. You know, I wouldn't know about that because you can't get hold of your speakers because they're really busy with other things. So things get left to the end, and managing your work in progress limits allows you to smooth things out. So you don't have a sort of a hockey stick at the end of where all the activity gets delivered at the end of your time box. It's much smoother during the pace. It prevents you from overloading, and from a mental health perspective, this the constant pressure of competing priorities and switching your context. So, right, I've got to look at this, you know, if I was Usman, right, I've got to look at 3 job descriptions. I've got 2 clients to prepare for interview. I've got to put that ad out, blah, blah, blah. You're switching context all of the time. And that takes time to take your head out of what you're doing, get your head back into what you need to look at, and then move on again. So that context switching takes time and creates additional stress. And WIP limits allow you to get rid of some of the clutter and the noise so that you really can focus on the delivery of value, whatever that value is for you and for the piece of work that you're doing. And as I said, context switching. So my advice would be, in that doing column, you never have more than 3 things, ever. Because the aim of the game is to move things to the right. So you might start, you've got something on your to-do list that is at the top of, you've prioritized it to the top of the list. You might have broken it down into, say, subtasks. So you might say, right, I've got to get the shopping done. So you might break it down to do a list, check what time the supermarket closes, and, you know, have I just checked with everybody that I haven't missed anything? You might break it down into some small tasks, and then you pull those things into the middle. So, right, let's make your list. Once you've made your list, you move it to done. Let's say on that second item, on the third item, check with the rest of the family that I haven't missed anything. Let's say you can't get in touch with everybody. So that stays in to do. So you look at the next thing on your to-do list, the second priority, and you start to do that. So that might be create your wireframe. Great. So you pull that into to do, and let's say you need some information from your client. So you're stuck. In software terms, we'd call that being blocked. Okay, so then you'll pull something else in from your to-do list, and that might be, I don't know, for example, Rob mentioned he runs a podcast. So maybe let's say prepping your podcast is the third thing on your priority list. And let's say that he is having a technical problem with his microphone. So he's then blocked. The temptation is to pull the fourth thing or the fifth thing or the sixth thing onto the list, and all of a sudden you're spinning lots and lots of plates, and you are overwhelmed by being busy, and you're frustrated by being blocked. And this is where stress occurs, and this is where you context switch more, and this is where you jump from one thing to another. And it's really tempting to start pulling in things that are lower down the backlog because you think you can do them, but then, you know, if your microphone then gets fixed, then you get distracted and that work in progress list gets bigger. So avoid the temptation to pull things in and focus on the things that you've pulled in and getting them done. So it may be that you can't get them all done. If your microphone's broken, you might say, break that task down and say, right, microphone's broken, I need to send it to the repair shop, split it into 2 tasks. Once it's at the repair shop, move it across the board. So you can't complete everything, but you can show what you have completed. If you are waiting for feedback from your client and for your wireframe, then chase the client, arrange to talk to them, and while you're waiting, do some reflection on the work, or eat, or go for a walk, or make time for those things that are important for your balance and for your mental health. And then when the client gets back to you, you can start fresh, because the aim of the game is to move things to that right hand column, but manage your work in progress, because that allows you to feel in control, to reduce your context switching, and to have a sense of completion. And, you know, working in technology, there is this, we all have, I haven't met anybody in a creative industry basically most human beings get an incredible sense of completion of ticking something off a list. Or you might be put a line through the list, or you might be one of the perfectionists who like a line and a tick, but we like to show that we're getting things done. So work in progress limits allow you to do that, especially when you're juggling, say, studying and working, or caring responsibilities, because everybody's got them, right? Whether it's kids or parents or cats or whatever, you know, juggling those home life things. So in order to help you do all of those things, there is time boxing is really important. So set yourself a time limit to do the things you need to do. So it might be if you're in software development, we often work in sprints. So it might be that you've got a 2-week sprint, or it might be that you look at your working week, or it might be a day. Don't make it too long, but create a time period through which you're going to focus your tasks. And so when you do your backlog, you put the things at the top of the backlog that you think are achievable in that time box. So for an example, we'll just say a working day. But as I said, it could be any time that you feel comfortable with. And then you manage your work in progress limits about what you want to complete during that day. Now, the Pomodoro technique it's got many names, and it's used it's used to great effect in lots of blogs and lots of business books. But essentially what it does is it allows you to time box, and it's called the Pomodoro technique because the chap who invented it had a kitchen timer which was the shape of a tomato. So he called it the Pomodoro technique because Pomodoro is Italian for tomato. So with the Pomodoro technique, you break your day into 25-minute segments, and you say, right, I'm going to focus on a task for 25 minutes, and then I'm going to have a 5-minute break. As you become more adept at it, you might break your day into 50-minute segments and then have a 10-minute break. And what you do is you say, I'm going to work on this task undisturbed by Slack messages, telephone calls, Facebook, emails, somebody talking to me, anything, solidly for 25 minutes. And when you first do it, what you'll find is your brain is jumping around like a cat on a hot tin roof because you're thinking of all the other stuff you should be doing and so on. But if you can just breathe through that and focus on the task for 25 minutes, and then you have a 5-minute break, go and get a cup of tea, walk around, do something else, check your messages if you want to. And then another 25 minutes without distraction, and then have another 5-minute break. And if you do 4 Pomodoros in a row, then you take a half-hour break, and you see the progress that you will make. And as you start to do this, what you'll find is you become incredibly productive in your Pomodoro time because you're not context switching and you're focusing or doing deep work, as some management people call it. And it allows you to to really get into the thing that you're working on. And eventually, you, as I said, you can expand your Pomodoro time. And it also, and one of the things you can do with this is to say, if you're in an organization and let's say you're working with a team and you're being asked to go on constant Teams or Zoom calls, you can say, right, team, let's all agree that between 10 and 11 is Pomodoro time. So there's going to be no meetings. You guys are going to do your deep work that you need to do deep work, and I'm going to do mine so that we can all focus. And we're going to make Pomodoro time, we're going to carve it out so that we all get a lunch break. So that's time as well that we're going to put into our calendars and all do at the same time so we all have a break. And that's good for mental health, and it's good for not coming out of this routine that a lot of people have got into in lockdown, which is 8 hours of meetings and then you do your job at night or at weekends or in the 10 minutes between meetings or so on. Pomodoro is always also really good for meetings. Can you have a 25-minute meeting and then you call time on it? If you can't do 25 minutes, can you hold your meetings to 45 or 50 minutes? And therefore people have got 10 minutes to prepare for the next one. So, because if you put an hour in, you'll use an hour. So if you time box what you're doing and you stick to that discipline, it creates time and space, and you will find it's a muscle that you can exercise like anything else, that you will get a lot more work done and you'll feel calmer and you've got space to think. So, and the last point is reflection time. So again, choose some Pomodoro time, 20, even if it's just 25 minutes a day, and say, okay, based on what I've done, have a gentle but honest conversation with yourself or with your team and say, what went well? And put all the good things. So to Lex's point, you know, what's the positive feedback you would give yourself? Well, we had a great meeting with the client, or the brainstorming was really effective, or I managed to take loads of notes in the lecture, or I've got my shopping list sorted and that went really well. What would you do again? So what did you do that worked? Did you use a bit of time boxing? Did you use an interactive whiteboard to help you and the client figure out what you wanted to do? What did you do that worked well for you? Did you do a bit of Moscow on your at-home to-do list? You know, what are the things you do again? What didn't go as well? I couldn't concentrate during my Pomodoro time. I had my shopping list, but then I forgot it was early closing. So I'd missed the supermarket time. Be honest. And what have you learned? Well, got to check the times. I've learned that Morrison's or Sainsbury's or whatever shuts at 4 o'clock on a Sunday. And what would you do differently? If you're doing this with a team, which is often called a retrospective in Scrum, in Agile, the thing to remember is this is a safe space. So this isn't about, I couldn't get my thing done because Bob is an idiot, or that person's not pulling their weight, or she's got a bad attitude, or she's just a bit rubbish, or whatever. This is an acknowledgement that life is messy and complicated and uncertain, and therefore things will go wrong. So what do we learn? What behavior can I change? What could I help support somebody else to change so that we make new mistakes? Because again, the point is to learn from what you're doing and make new mistakes. Because if you're not making mistakes, you're not learning. If you're not making mistakes, you're not innovating. So mistakes I don't hire anybody who can't tell me what their most catastrophic mistake was and what they learned from it. If they can't answer that question well, I stop the interview. I've hired hundreds of people, and if they don't have that learning mentality, then I'm not interested, because to Rob's point, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know anything. I've been doing this for decades, and the more I know, the more I realize, I'm I'm just at the beginning of my journey. So I want people who are curious and want to learn. And if you don't acknowledge what didn't go well, then you can't learn. And so for me, failure is a really positive thing because it's an opportunity to learn. And so when you're in that conversation with your team, then it's a safe space. And I've worked in organizations where they actually give people a prize for making the biggest mistake in a particular time box period. You know, they shout them out because the point is to make new mistakes, to have new learning opportunities. The definition of madness is having the same behavior, making the same mistake time and time again and expecting a different result. That way madness lies, that way stress lies and mental health issues lie. Embracing it and saying, wow, that was completely rubbish. I'm never going to do that again. Right. How could we avoid that? That is a way to help you grow as a person and to help your team and your organization or your partner or your family improve. I do this with my son all the time, you know, fully put my hand up when I've been completely rubbish. Like I'll have to go and admit that now because I'm still here and I'm not playing Among Us. And then we'll figure it out. I've got a friend who does this in Scrum's Christmas with her kids. It's like, well, how could we make Christmas better next year? And one of the great things her 7-year-old said is, I was a bit bored because I'd opened all my presents by 9 o'clock. So the following Christmas, they organized presents so they had them throughout the day. You know, you could say, was Christmas a failure? Well, kid was bored, right? So what did they learn from it? They learned something and they changed it. Inspect and adapt. So feedback loops, and this is about this inspect and adapt. You do something, you run an experiment, you figure out, you know, you get some feedback from someone, client, a series of unit tests, whatever, you learn from something and then you iterate and do something else. And it's a great way of living and it's a great way of working. And my view on the kind of the post-COVID world or the continuing COVID world is that uncertainty, you know, life is uncertain and that's not going away. And so we have to become more comfortable with the fact that things will change, and change is a constant. It's not, you know, we don't live in a fixed world where change happens occasionally. Change is always happening to you, to your family, to work, to the environment, right? You wake up one day and we voted ourselves out of Europe. Who knew? Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Kirsten. Right, I will just put us back on. So we're all on the screen, which I believe is that now. Over to you, Matt.
Guys, thanks very much, Kirsten, Rob, Lex, for your time and insights. I think whilst we can't see everyone will join me in giving you an applause for those. I think there's some really handy and some great tips. I think being so open in things like this is incredibly hard to do. And I think some of the questions and some of the chat I've been following, at least through this panel, has seen that. So what I'm going to do is run through a few questions until time gets away from us and pose them to each of you. And I just want to run through a couple of those. So I've got the first one, and I think this one is probably best posed to you, Lex, around how do you recognize burnout before it's too late? When did you realize that was happening, and what were the key signs that you saw?
Sorry, I was muted. I think it's a difficult one, that, because I think it probably manifests quite differently in different people. For me, I think I probably got dangerously close to it when I had that experience of kind of having a bit of a meltdown. I think at that point, I kind of, there was all those feelings of doubt in my professional ability, which was one thing, but there was also a real lack of passion for it at that point as well, which I think is a real kind of danger sign. Is like, you don't have to enjoy your work every day, like definitely not. But when there's absolutely like, when you're starting to find like zero satisfaction from it when you used to in the past, I think that's a good sign of something's wrong there. Something's not working for you. But like I said, it can take different forms for different people. I think sometimes it can just be an overworking thing for people. Sometimes it can just be a lack of kind of creative satisfaction. And yeah, it's probably quite a personal thing to try and figure out, but hopefully you can recognize the signs of it.
Definitely. Thank you. And Kirsten, I'm very conscious of your time because you've got Among Us to play. Your son clearly has some great taste in games. I had some really, I started playing that over the weekend and it is incredibly fun. But so you mentioned the Pomodoro technique. I'm a big fan of it. How did you, do you set a time limit outside of that? So let's say you've hit 4 Pomodoros on your whip and stuff that you're working towards. Do you do that until they're done? Do you do it until you hit a blocker? How do you work out how much time you put into something?
Okay, so first of all, you have to decide what your window is. So it might, as I said, you might, if you're working in Scrum, then you're probably on a 2-week sprint. It might be that if this is your personal backlog, that you want to do it over a week or over a weekend or over a day. So that's your overall time box. In terms of the work in progress, you focus on your work in progress till it's done. So if, let's say, your time box is a day, and you have 3 things and they're all blocked, and you get to the end of the day and they're unblocked, that tells you that there's some fundamental problem. So if I'm looking at a software development team and there are things sitting in work in progress for more than a day, then that's a signal to me to go in and say that there's a problem here. So is it that the thing that is on the list is just too big? And so that's the feedback that we get, that it's too big. It needs to be broken into smaller chunks, because it might be that there's 13 things you need to do and you've done 12, but you're blocked on the last one. So the learning from that is break them into smaller chunks, then you can complete your 12, and then you've got one thing that you really need to focus on and perhaps do some deep work on. But I wouldn't let anything sit in work in progress for more than a day.
Perfect, thank you. And what do you find is, and this is open to anybody that wants to answer it, but what do you feel the best internal mechanism for dealing with your imposter syndrome is? How do you manage that and manage it internally?
Pretty much using a combination of one of those kind of 5 or 6 main points that I pointed out. In terms of recognizing it, I think yeah, I saw the question come up, about how do you identify when you first suffered with it, and I think it was more just I had that regular sense of exactly what it was, that kind of, almost like a real live version of Among Us, but like you were the imposter, but you didn't want to be the imposter, but you sat there going, oh, everyone seems to know what they're doing, and you kind of forget the fact that, yeah, they've all been there, they've I don't know, I'm just starting my career, I'm a couple of years in, they've been doing it for like 5, 6, 7 years, they've been at this particular company a couple of years, so they know the client and the code base and how it all works, and you're only maybe 6 months in and there's still a lot to learn, I don't know. But you kind of, all that goes out the window, and for me it was just about, it kept coming up that I was just kind of felt a bit inferior, like everyone else seems to have a handle on what they're doing, and I feel like I'm having to ask too many questions, or I'm not really grasping this particular thing just yet. And I think eventually, after this kind of term, imposter syndrome, I mean, like Lex said, it's not a new sort of term, but you start reading more about it and you kind of go, oh, that kind of fits with how I feel, and that for me was when it kind of came to light that that's how I felt, and that's kind of what it was. And then once you identify a thing, you can kind of then work on some ways to get around it, or to work with it, and to hopefully improve things.
Can I just add to that? I think ways that I've dealt with it. So I got a mentor, and that was really important for me to have somebody who wasn't in my day-to-day life, that I could play back to the things that I was doing, and they could sort of point out where I had done good things. The other thing is keeping a little work diary, as Rob said earlier. So just keeping a list of things achieved, and being able to then look back on that and say, actually, you know, these are the good things that I have done, and to be able to look back over that and say, well, this is how far I've come, and these are my achievements. Because as Lex said, you know, you tend to focus on the negative rather than the positive. So having a record of the things that you've done, like had a successful client meeting, or, you know, the team delivered this thing, or managed to have a difficult conversation and didn't get upset. By keeping those diaries, it allows you to look back and see that you are valuable, and to be able to celebrate success. Also, the other thing I did with my team is created a habit where we would call out each other and say, and sort of give high fives or whatever. So when somebody did something good, we'd say, you know, great job. And so it meant that when I did something good, people would say, I would get shouted out. And when somebody else did something good, I could shout them out. And it creates that positive reinforcement culture. So the diary's great. If you can get a mentor or have someone to talk to. I spoke to a group of colleagues that I'd worked with for a long time. At the beginning of lockdown, I had a real challenge with self-confidence and imposter syndrome. And I reached out to some people that I'd worked with before, and sort of that I trusted, and laid it all out. And I basically got a slap on the back of the head. And they were like, don't you remember when this great thing happened? And don't you remember when you helped us do such and such? And don't you remember when we were all crunched and we did such and such? You know, remember the great things that you've done as a team. And sometimes you just need someone to remind you that you're good. And the other thing to remember is pretty much everybody else feels imposter syndrome. Everybody feels it. So you're not the only one.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I mean, I really just wanted to try this out, but to add to what Kirsten's saying there, I really wanted to see if this worked. My workplace has set up a Slack channel that has that is called Recognition, and I totally agree that I think it's important for everyone to kind of make sure that they're celebrating each other as well, because especially right now when you're working from home, it can feel really isolated doing work sometimes, and sometimes you don't even have face-to-face time with people that you work with, and it's just text-based. So yeah, having that kind of channel where you can celebrate each other and just say, like, this person was really helpful and they really helped me out today. You know, you might not actually say that to them, but making that a more public thing is really good to help with those feelings.
Fantastic. And there was one more which I do want to bring up before we close, because I do notice that the numbers starting to dwindle down slightly, but we're all coming at this from different angles as well. All of these things, and it's great being able to identify them. How do you bring those up with an employer?
I think if you've got a half decent employer, they should have some facility to be able to do that. I know in the last couple of places I've worked, they have regular one-to-ones, so that you and your manager, and that's a great place to bring up stuff like that. And it should be a very open and non-judgmental space. You can bring up any kind of grievances or you know, any of these kind of issues or how you're feeling, and they should really be taking steps to help you with that. I think with imposter syndrome specifically, there is an element of you know, there's only so much reassurance people can provide you that you're doing a good job and you belong there. There is an element of work that you have to do as well to kind of, you know, work with that. But yeah, that's something we have, and similar to what Lex said, we have like a what do they call it, the kudos channel. So it's people, you know, giving recognition to their fellow colleagues and other things that have, whether it's that these guys have done something really great, or thank you to X because they really helped me out. So that kind of stuff can help. But yeah, I think you should hopefully work in a place where they foster that culture of being open and transparent about everything, even things like mental health and imposter syndrome, and be able to bring them up, and then they can help you, whether it's identifying training that you need, or just, I don't know, a shift in how you work that might lighten your load or give you more, or I don't know, something like that.
Great. Any tips for anybody else? I know it's the whole "it's okay not to be okay" is a great term, and it's spoken about a lot more now, and a lot of places, our business included, we're doing a lot more around well-being of mental health. We all know what recruiters are like, right? We're all social creatures who want to fly around, and we all drink beers on Fridays and wear pinstripe suits, but in reality it is a social place that we sit in our offices. And I know I personally struggled at the start of lockdown to be able to comprehend everything changing and the world changing the way it was. Lex, was there anything you had from when you had this before and you brought it up with an employer, and how you went around talking about it?
I guess when I had that like spike, and I kind of thought that it was like not great to kind of open up and be vulnerable at work at that point, but when I hit that kind of spike, I did have a bit of a at work cry and everything like that. And it became apparent that, work actually gave a damn. Like they helped pay for, like, I had some like therapy at the time, and they offered to pay for it, which was quite incredible. And I think, so that was like a couple of years ago, and now I'm at a different employer, but they take it really seriously. They had a thing where just before lockdown, some people got trained in mental health first aid, and they've started taking it, they take it just as seriously as if you've got a cold. Like, you can take a day off if you're having like a bad mental health day. I've several times over lockdown said, like, it's not happening today. Like, I need a day off because I'm just exhausted, because my work's my home, my home's my work. It's just getting a bit overwhelming, as well as all pandemic on top of it. And my manager's been quite fine with that, and that is something that I considered quite important going into that job. Is I think if people, what am I trying to say? I think a question that will get asked a lot of employers after COVID will be, how did you handle coronavirus at your workplace? Because I think it's really amplified the importance for taking care of your staff in a mental health capacity.
Agree more. And I think that brings us nicely to a close on this. And for the purposes of this, if anybody is wanting to reach out to Lex, to Rob, to Kirsten, and talk about these things, and have a familiar face that have opened up and talked to you about this, then they're all open to. As am I, as of other people in our organisation and other parts around it. But I just want to thank you guys for your time putting that together. Thank all of the attendees for coming. There will be a recording available for this, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you,
everyone.
See you later, everyone.